Welcome, restless dreamer. You've just stepped into the shadows of sleep, where stories whisper and the darkness listens. I'm your guide tonight, your voice in the void, here to lead you gently into nightmares wrapped in lullabies. Before we begin, press like if you're brave enough, and subscribe for more midnight tales that blur the line between sleep and terror. Tell me in the comments, where are you watching from, and what hour has found you? The rain came fast that evening, a sudden downpour that rattled the roof like loose gravel and painted the windows with streaks of silver. I was curled up on the couch, half watching some forgettable sitcom, when the doorbell rang. At first, I thought I'd imagined it. Nobody ever visited me unannounced, especially not at night. But it came again, 2 short chimes, followed by silence. I hesitated, a strange unease settling into my stomach, before pulling myself up. When I opened the door, I found a woman standing there, drenched from head to toe. She looked to be in her late 50s, her gray hair plastered against her temples, her glasses fogged from the storm. Her long coat clung to her thin frame like wet paper. "I'm so sorry to bother you," she said, her voice trembling, though I couldn't tell if it was from the cold or something else. "I live just across the street. The power's out at my place. Could I wait inside until it passes?" I blinked. I'd only moved into the neighborhood 2 weeks ago. I didn't know many of the locals, let alone who lived across the street. Still, her soaked appearance and the violent rain outside made it hard to refuse. "Of course," I said, stepping aside. "Come in." She shuffled past me, leaving little puddles on the entryway floor. "My name's Mrs. Calloway," she said, smiling faintly. Her lips were pale, and her teeth looked too sharp when they caught the light. "And you must be the new one. I've been meaning to come say hello." I shut the door, suddenly aware of how quiet the house felt now, the storm muffled by the walls. "I appreciate you letting me in. I know it's odd," she added, her eyes darting around my living room like she was taking inventory. "I hate storms. Always have. They unsettle me." I nodded, unsure how to respond. She seemed harmless enough, just a lonely neighbor caught in bad weather. "Can I get you a towel?" I asked. Her smile widened. "That would be lovely." I hurried to the bathroom, grabbed a clean towel, and returned, only to find her standing not in the entryway where I'd left her, but in the middle of the living room, staring at the old basement door near the kitchen. For some reason, that door had always unnerved me. It was original to the house, solid oak, scarred with deep scratches, as if someone had dragged something sharp across it long ago. I hadn't even been down there yet. Mrs. Calloway's head tilted slightly, her gaze fixed on the doorknob like she was listening for something. "Here you go," I said quickly, extending the towel. She turned, startled, her smile returning a little too fast. "Thank you, dear." She dabbed her hair, though her eyes kept drifting back to the basement. "You've got a lovely home," she said. "So much history in these walls." I frowned. "How do you know that? You haven't been inside before." "Oh," she said, her tone airy. "I've lived here for decades. I've seen families come and go. This house, well, let's just say it has a way of attracting certain kinds of people." Something about the way she said it made the hairs on my arms stand up. I tried to shake it off. "Would you like some tea?" She nodded eagerly. "That would be perfect." I busied myself in the kitchen, glad for the distraction, though unease gnawed at me. When I glanced back, she was still standing near the basement door, her fingers brushing lightly against the wood, as if she were tracing old wounds. By the time I returned with steaming cups, she had stepped away, her face calm and polite once more. We sat on the couch. She sipped her tea, her hands trembling only slightly. "You live alone, don't you?" she asked suddenly. The question caught me off guard. Yes. How did you—" "I can tell," she interrupted, nodding. "This house feels empty, too empty, almost like it's waiting." My chest tightened. I forced a laugh. "That's a strange thing to say." She leaned closer. "You haven't been downstairs yet, have you?" I froze. The words lodged in my throat. She chuckled softly, setting her teacup on the table. Don't worry. You'll go down soon enough. Everyone does. The storm outside raged harder, thunder shaking the glass. And for the first time since she'd stepped inside, I wondered if letting her in had been a mistake. I should have asked her to leave right then. Every instinct screamed at me that something wasn't right. But politeness, and maybe fear, kept me frozen. Mrs. Calloway's eyes lingered on me. Too sharp, too curious. You know, she said, this house has stories. Some folks say the basement was once used for unpleasant things. Secrets buried in the dark. I swallowed hard. How do you know all this? Her lips twitched, almost a smirk. I told you. I've been here a long, long time. The way she said it made her age seem irrelevant. Before I could reply, a loud thump echoed from beneath the floorboards. The sound was deep, muffled, and far too deliberate to be the settling of old wood. I nearly dropped my tea. What was that? She didn't flinch. In fact, her smile grew. They're awake. A chill sliced down my spine. Who's awake? Her gaze returned to the basement door. You'll see. That was it. I set my cup down, stood, and tried to keep my voice steady. I think you should go now. For a moment she looked offended, then amused. Oh dear, I don't think I can leave. Not yet. Lightning flashed, flooding the room in stark white. In that brief second, her reflection in the window didn't look right. Her face was longer, her eyes completely black, her smile too wide. But when the light faded, she appeared normal again, sipping tea like nothing had happened. The thumping came again, louder this time, followed by a scraping sound against the basement door. I backed toward the kitchen, my pulse racing. What's in there? She rose slowly, her wet coat dripping on the rug. Not what, who. And then, her voice dropped to a whisper. They've been waiting for someone like you. The knob on the basement door began to rattle violently. I stared in horror as the wood shuddered against something pressing from the other side. No, I muttered, shaking my head. This is insane. You need to leave. Now. She only laughed, a brittle, jagged sound that scraped against my nerves. You invited me in. You opened the door. That's all they needed. The door burst open with a deafening crack, splinters flying. The smell that rolled out was damp and rotten, like old soil mixed with decay. I couldn't see clearly in the dark, but shapes shifted at the top of the stairs. Pale limbs, too many fingers, faces half-formed and twitching. They writhed and crawled upward, drawn into the light. I stumbled back, screaming. Mrs. Calloway stood calmly by the doorway, her eyes shining black now, her grin impossibly wide. This house doesn't belong to you. It belongs to them. One of the creatures dragged itself out, its body twisted, its jaw unhinged as it let out a low moan. Another followed, its face a blur of human features that never settled, constantly changing. I turned to run, but Mrs. Calloway was suddenly blocking the front door, her movements unnaturally fast. No running, dear. You've been chosen. Panic clawed through me. I bolted toward the back door, but the floorboards beneath me cracked, splitting open like a mouth. Cold, grasping hands shot out, clawing at my ankles. I screamed, kicking free, barely managing to pull myself up. The house groaned, every wall seeming to breathe. The lights flickered, then died, plunging everything into shadows lit only by lightning. In the dark, I heard her voice, soft and close to my ear, though I couldn't see her. You should never have opened the door. Something cold brushed the back of my neck. I spun, only to find emptiness. And then, from the corner of my eye, I saw the basement creatures spilling into the room, crawling across walls and ceilings, their limbs too long, their faces stretched in silent screams. Mrs. Calloway stood among them, no longer hiding her true shape. Her body rippled, her skin splitting as something larger pressed against it from within. I ran. I didn't think. I didn't breathe. I just ran through the kitchen, out the sliding glass door, into the storm. The rain pounded against me, but I didn't care. I didn't stop until I was halfway down the street, drenched and shaking. When I turned back, the house loomed in the storm. Every window glowing faintly red, shadows moving inside like restless figures. And on the porch, silhouetted by lightning, Mrs. Calloway stood watching me. She raised a hand and waved, her smile visible even in the distance. I didn't go back. I never went back. I never wanted to live at the edge of town. I liked busy streets, the hum of traffic outside my window, the comfort of knowing there were a dozen neighbors close enough to hear me scream if I needed to. But my two friends, Ryan and Claire, were obsessed with the idea of finding a cheap rental with a little more peace. That's how we ended up in a weathered two-story house where the streetlights stopped, surrounded by thick trees and only a scattering of other homes. The first night we moved in, I noticed the silence. It wasn't the comforting quiet of a suburban block. It was the heavy, pressing kind that makes you realize how far away everyone else is. "Damn, this place is perfect," Ryan said as he tossed a box onto the couch. "Big yard, no nosy neighbors." Claire was less enthusiastic, though she smiled for his sake. I caught her glancing at the trees outside, where the shadows clung unnaturally thick, as if refusing to be pushed back by the porch light. That first evening, as we unpacked, I heard something. Faint footsteps crunching leaves outside. I froze by the window, listening. At first I thought it was an animal, but then there was a soft whistle, a tune, rising and falling. "Do you guys hear that?" I whispered. Ryan looked up from his beer. "Hear what?" "The whistling." Claire tilted her head, listening. The sound stopped, like whoever it was had realized I'd noticed. She frowned, but Ryan just shrugged it off. "Country folks. Probably someone walking their dog." But when I looked again, the street was empty. Over the next few nights, the noises came back. The whistle, the crunch of footsteps circling the house. Sometimes a sharp tap on the window. Ryan dismissed it every time, but Claire grew quieter, her nerves showing. The real fear began when I noticed things were missing. The first was the padlock on the shed out back. Ryan swore he'd locked it after we stored the lawn equipment, but one morning it hung open, swinging from the latch. Then a week later, my flashlight was gone from the kitchen drawer. Claire lost a pair of shoes she swore she left by the back door. I began to feel watched, not just at night, but during the day too. Sometimes, as I sat at my desk upstairs, I'd glance out the window and see movement in the woods, a shape, a pale figure half hidden between the trees. When I blinked, it was gone. One afternoon, I finally spotted the neighbors. An older woman in a faded floral dress stood at the tree line watching our house. She didn't wave, she didn't smile, she just stared. Then when I opened the door to confront her, she turned and slipped back into the woods. When I told Ryan, he laughed. Creepy neighbors. Every small town has them. But Claire didn't laugh. She'd started locking her bedroom door at night. The turning point came late one Friday night. Ryan had gone to a bar in town, leaving Claire and me alone. We were watching TV when the power flickered. The lights went out. "Great," Claire muttered. "This house is cursed." I grabbed my phone to use as a flashlight. That's when I noticed it. Shadows moving across the living room window. Figures. At least two of them. "Claire," I whispered, "get upstairs." We crept toward the staircase, my phone shaking in my hand. Then a knock. Slow. Rhythmic. Right on the front door. We froze. The knock came again. Then a voice. Calm. Low. Almost sing-song. "You shouldn't be here." Claire grabbed my arm, her nails digging in. "Who's there?" I called, my voice cracking. No answer. Just a faint laugh, followed by retreating footsteps on the porch. When Ryan came home an hour later, drunk and oblivious, he found us barricaded in my room. He thought we were overreacting. "If someone's screwing with us, we'll just tell him to back off," he said. Simple, but I didn't sleep that night. Even with the door locked, I could hear it, whispering outside my window. And I swear, I heard the sound of someone breathing, just inches from the glass. By the next week, we were unraveling. Ryan still played it off like it was all in our heads, but I caught him double-checking the locks now. Even he had started noticing things. The muddy footprints on the porch, the strange scratches on the back door, the shed items going missing one by one. Claire wanted to move. This isn't safe. They're not just messing with us. They're watching us. Waiting. Ryan rolled his eyes, but I was starting to agree with her. Then came the night I saw one of them inside. It was around 2 a.m. I'd gotten up for water, padding quietly down the hallway. The moonlight lit the kitchen just enough for me to see movement. Someone standing near the counter. At first I thought it was Ryan, but then the figure turned and I saw a man's face. Pale, hollow-eyed, grinning at me with a wide, unnatural smile. I dropped the glass I was holding. It shattered loudly, and the man slipped into the shadows before Ryan came stumbling in, demanding to know what the hell I was doing. "There was someone here," I shouted. But of course the man was gone. Claire believed me. Ryan, less so, but he was shaken. That night he slept with a bat beside his bed. 2 days later, the truth came out. I was in the attic, looking for an extra lamp when I found an old box shoved behind insulation. Inside were photographs, dozens of them, all Polaroids. At first they were old shots of the house from decades ago, birthday parties, family dinners, normal things. But then the photos grew stranger, darker. People standing in the woods, faces blurred, eyes wide. Groups of men and women gathered on the porch at night, holding candles. And then, the most recent photos. United States. One was of Ryan carrying in boxes the day we moved. Another was Claire sitting on the porch steps tying her shoes. And another, me, asleep in my bed, mouth slightly open. I dropped the box. My stomach turned to ice. Someone had been in our house. When I showed Claire, she nearly fainted. Ryan finally believed us. "We're leaving," he said, his voice tight. "Tonight. I don't care how much the lease costs to break. We're done." But it was already too late. That night, as we packed frantically, the power went out again. The house plunged into suffocating darkness. From outside came the sound of footsteps, dozens of them, surrounding the house. Then the whistling, that same haunting tune I'd heard on the first night. Only now it came from every side of the house, overlapping, circling us like predators. Claire screamed when the first window shattered. Ryan swung his bat, yelling for us to run. I grabbed her hand, dragging her toward the back door. But when I yanked it open, figures were already there, smiling in the moonlight, their pale faces watching us with hunger. "This isn't your house," one of them whispered. "It's ours." We slammed the door shut, hearts pounding. The sound of glass breaking echoed from upstairs. Footsteps thundered through the walls. They were inside. Ryan shouted something, swinging wildly as shapes emerged from the shadows. I don't remember dropping the lamp or Claire pulling me toward the basement door. I just remember the laughter, low, guttural, and far too close. We stumbled into the basement, locking the door behind us. The last thing I saw before it slammed shut was Ryan, swallowed by a crowd of pale figures, his scream cut short. Now I sit here in the dark, Claire sobbing beside me. Above us, the footsteps move slowly, deliberately, room to room. They're not in a hurry. They know we have nowhere else to go. And I finally understand. We never moved into a rental. We moved straight into someone else's hunting ground. I always thought our neighborhood was the kind of place people moved to when they wanted peace. Rows of maple trees lined the sidewalks. Kids biked around without a care, and in the evenings, you could hear sprinklers ticking in perfect rhythm with the fading light. It wasn't exciting, but that's exactly why my wife and I chose it. After years of renting tiny apartments, this house was our first real home. The white shutters, the wide porch, the kind of yard that looked best in autumn. This was where we were going to plant our roots. That's why, when the Mitchells moved in next door, I welcomed them with genuine enthusiasm. They seemed like the kind of family the neighborhood would be lucky to have. A polished wife with polite smiles, a young daughter who waved shyly from behind her mother's legs, and Gregory, the husband, who shook my hand with a firmness that nearly cracked my knuckles. "Beautiful place you've got here," he said, his eyes scanning my porch as though cataloging every detail. "Even prettier than ours." I laughed politely, thinking it was just small talk, but his eyes lingered too long on the siding, the windows, the way the morning light fell against the white paint. It didn't feel like admiration. It felt like appraisal. At first it was harmless. Gregory would make comments when I ran into him outside. "That bay window must get incredible sunlight in the morning," he'd say. Or, "The way your roofline catches the sunset, just perfect." He never talked about his own place, only mine. I brushed it off as awkward friendliness. Then came the first offer. He mentioned it casually one afternoon while we were both raking leaves. "If you ever think about selling, name your price. I'd buy this place in a heartbeat." I chuckled. "We just moved in. Trust me, we're not going anywhere." But his expression didn't change. He just nodded slowly, like I hadn't given a real answer. After that, the offers became more persistent. Sometimes he'd stop me as I was getting the mail, pressing again about selling. Other times he'd ask my wife when she was working in the yard. Always the same unnerving smile. Always the same fixed gaze at the house. One evening, I caught him standing in our driveway. He wasn't knocking, wasn't walking by, just standing there, staring at the porch. When I opened the door, he gave me a broad grin and said, "Just admiring the place." That was the first time my stomach tightened with unease. Things escalated after we refused his offers more firmly. Subtle at first, a broken garden gnome, the sound of footsteps crunching across our lawn late at night, though no one was ever there when I looked. Our dog, Max, began barking at the fence, teeth bared, as though someone was just out of sight. Then one morning, Max was gone. The gate had been unlatched, though I knew I'd locked it. We searched for hours, called shelters, put up signs. Nothing. Gregory shook his head when I told him. "Shame. A dog like that deserves a safer place to live." The words sat in my chest like ice. After Max disappeared, I started noticing the little things. Locks on our doors that felt looser than they should. The faint smell of cologne in the entryway, even though neither of us wore any. My wife swore she heard someone on the porch one night, the boards creaking under slow, deliberate steps. But when I ran outside, the yard was empty, except for the glow of Gregory's upstairs window, blinds half drawn, a silhouette standing there, watching. I told myself we were overreacting, that maybe we were letting paranoia take hold, but the feeling never left. The night that convinced me something was terribly wrong happened just past midnight. I woke to the sound of flickering, our porch light clicking on and off. At first I thought it was faulty wiring, but when I looked through the blinds, I froze. Gregory was standing at the edge of our yard, perfectly still. His face was faint in the light, but unmistakable. He wasn't moving toward us, wasn't calling out, just watching, as the light strobed across his expressionless features. I yelled at him, asked what he was doing. He didn't answer, didn't flinch, just turned slowly, walked back toward his house and disappeared inside. I barely slept after that. The truth sank in heavy and cold. He wasn't trying to buy the house anymore. He was trying to take it from us, piece by piece, by making us feel unsafe, by stripping away the comfort that made it a home. And if he could do all of that without ever setting foot inside, I dreaded what would happen the day he finally did. I didn't sleep that night. Not really. I'd lie down for a while, close my eyes, and then the faintest creak or whisper of wind against the walls would yank them open again. Every time, I'd half expect to see her face pressed against the window, watching. But there was nothing, just the distorted shapes of tree branches swaying in the faint glow of the moon. By morning, I convinced myself it was just fatigue making me paranoid. I went about my day as normally as I could, though I found myself avoiding mirrors more than usual. When I brushed my teeth, I kept my eyes on the sink. When I showered, I let the steam blur the reflection so I wouldn't accidentally catch sight of anything I didn't want to see. Still, I couldn't shake the sense that something was trailing just behind me, like a shadow that wasn't mine. That afternoon, I decided to return the box. Maybe it was stupid, maybe even irrational, but part of me thought if I gave it back, the strange presence I'd stirred up might let me go. The antique shop sat on a quiet side street, tucked between a shuttered florist and a convenience store that looked like it hadn't had customers in years. When I pushed open the heavy glass door, the little bell above it gave a tired jingle. The air inside smelled like dust and aged wood, with a faint sweetness of dried flowers. The woman behind the counter looked up at me. She was older, maybe in her 70s, with watery blue eyes and a face lined from decades of squinting. "You again," she said softly. Not a question. More like she had been expecting me. I set the box on the counter. I think I shouldn't have bought this." Her eyes flicked to the box, then back to me. "Sometimes things find their way to people who aren't ready for them." I froze. What's that supposed to mean? She didn't answer directly. Instead, she placed her thin, veined hands over the box as though she were trying to warm it. "Did you open it?" I nodded reluctantly. "Yeah." There was a photograph inside, of a girl. The woman's expression tightened. "Ah, then she knows you." The way she said it sent a cold ripple through me. "Who is she?" I asked. The woman shook her head. "Not who, what?" She slid the box toward herself and tucked it under the counter. Some things are best left buried. I stood there for a long moment, waiting for her to explain more. But she didn't. She just gave me a look that told me the conversation was over. By the time I stepped back into the sunlight, I almost felt lighter. Maybe she was right. Maybe all I needed to do was get rid of the damn thing. But that night, everything got worse. I had just turned off the lights and crawled into bed when I heard it. Faint scratching, like fingernails against wood. I froze, straining to hear. It came again, this time from inside the wall near my headboard. At first I thought maybe it was mice, but then, slowly, the sound shifted downward, dragging across the wall and toward the floor, like something crawling. I held my breath. Then, from the corner of the room, I heard it. Soft, muffled laughter. I sat upright instantly, flicking on the lamp. The room was empty. The corners were just shadows. My chest heaved with quick, sharp breaths. "Get a grip," I whispered to myself. But when I looked at the mirror across the room, my blood ran cold. My reflection wasn't sitting on the bed. It was standing right in front of the glass, smiling. I shot out of bed so fast I nearly tripped, grabbing the lamp and throwing it toward the mirror. The glass shattered, spraying across the floor. My reflection vanished, heart hammering. I stood there in the silence, waiting for something else to move. Nothing did. Only the broken shards glittered in the pale light. I barely slept at all. The next day I decided to dig deeper. I returned to the shop, but when I arrived, the door was locked, and the windows were covered with brown paper. No sign, no explanation, just gone. Back home, I scoured the internet for anything about antique boxes, haunted mirrors, cursed photographs. Most of what I found was garbage, cheap forums filled with stories that felt made up. But one post stood out. It was buried deep in an old thread about unwanted objects. Someone mentioned a box matching the same description. Wooden, small, with a sliding lid. Inside had been a picture of a girl. The user had written just 3 chilling words before the thread ended abruptly. She found me. That night, as I sat in my room scrolling through those words over and over, I felt the air shift. A heaviness pressed in, like the atmosphere itself was leaning closer. Then came the whisper, low and clear, right behind me. "You can't give me back." I spun around, but there was no one there. Only the broken shards of the mirror scattered on the floor, each fragment holding a sliver of my terrified face. I realized then the shopkeeper hadn't really taken the box away. She'd only taken it from sight. The girl, or the thing wearing her face, was never inside the box at all. She was inside the photograph, and now she was inside me. When I first moved into the duplex with my daughter Ava, I told myself it was a fresh start. After the divorce, I couldn't afford much, but the 2-bedroom unit with its flaking paint and patchy lawn was ours, and that was enough. The neighborhood seemed quiet, mostly retirees who waved from their porches or watered their gardens in the evenings. I thought that peace would finally settle the storm in my life. It wasn't long before I noticed the man who lived next door. He introduced himself as Mr. Harlan, a wiry, middle-aged man with thinning gray hair, a stiff gait, and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. He always wore the same faded work overalls, the knees permanently stained with grease. His voice had a curious rasp to it, and he had this unnerving habit of licking his lips before speaking, as if he were savoring the words. At first, he was just another neighbor, polite enough, a little strange, but harmless, or so I thought. The first time he knocked on my door was on a rainy Sunday afternoon. Ava was upstairs playing with her dolls when I heard 3 sharp knocks, followed by 2 lighter ones. The rhythm was so deliberate that I remember pausing mid-step before opening the door. Mr. Harlan stood there, rain dripping from the brim of his cap. He smiled faintly and asked if he could borrow a hammer, said he was trying to fix a shelf, and his had given up on him. I handed him mine without hesitation. He returned it the next morning, wrapped in a clean dish towel, almost too carefully. That struck me as odd. Who takes the time to polish a borrowed hammer? But I let it go. A few days later, it was a screwdriver set, then pliers, then my lawn rake. Each time he knocked, it was with that same peculiar rhythm. 3 knocks, pause, 2 more. Each time, he had an excuse rehearsed and ready. I didn't realize it at first, but it was becoming a routine. One evening in June, I was cooking dinner when he knocked again, asking for batteries. The good kind, he specified. Not the cheap ones, he said. They never lasted. His eyes drifted past me into the living room while I fetched them, scanning my shelves, my photographs, the coat rack by the door. I told myself he was just curious. People look. But when I shut the door, I noticed the uneasy thrum in my chest. Over the next month, the requests grew stranger. He asked to borrow aluminum foil, but only the heavy-duty kind. He wanted my vacuum cleaner because his had swallowed something it shouldn't. He wanted a step stool for a hallway light that never seemed to stay on. Each time, I felt less like I was doing a neighborly favor and more like I was being tested. The first real red flag came one Thursday evening. I came home early with Ava after her piano lesson and went straight to the porch to grab the spare key from under the ceramic turtle I always kept it in. It wasn't there. I tore apart the porch, thinking maybe the wind had knocked it loose, but it was gone. My stomach sank. That key was the only way inside if I ever locked myself out. Later that night, Mr. Harlan knocked on the door asking for sugar. As I handed him the bag, I mentioned the missing key. His expression didn't flicker. He offered to help me look, crouching on my porch with a flashlight for 20 minutes, checking cracks in the steps and corners by the railing. The very next morning, the key was back in its spot, perfectly placed under the ceramic turtle. When I thanked him for finding it, he looked at me blankly and said he hadn't touched it. Maybe I'd just missed it the first time, he suggested. I knew I hadn't. The following weekend, I decided to deep clean the house. That's when I noticed something far more disturbing. I had a small filing cabinet in the corner of my bedroom closet, where I kept all my important documents. My passport, birth certificate, Ava's school records, bank statements, it was all there. But my passport wasn't. I pulled everything out, heart pounding harder with each drawer I emptied. My bank statements were shuffled out of order. Ava's medical records had been moved to a different drawer. My social security card wasn't where it should have been. Nothing else was missing. No valuables. Just my passport, and evidence that someone had been inside those drawers. I sat on the floor, surrounded by scattered papers, and tried to think of any possible explanation. Had I moved things in a hurry and forgotten? I was meticulous about my documents ever since the divorce, when every slip of paper mattered for custody hearings. Someone had been in my house. The locks showed no signs of tampering. Every window was latched. But the missing key. That night I barely slept. Every creak in the house sounded like a footstep. Every shadow beyond the blinds felt like eyes watching. Ava slept soundly in her room, unaware of the fear coursing through my veins. I wanted to call the police, but what would I say? That my papers were out of order? That my key had disappeared and then reappeared? They would tell me I was imagining things. The next evening, Mr. Harlan knocked again. This time he wanted to borrow my stepladder. I stood in the doorway, watching him closely. He shifted his weight from foot to foot, licking his lips between sentences. That's when I noticed a small bandage wrapped around his index finger. He laughed it off, saying he'd cut himself on an envelope while sorting mail. But when I returned to my filing cabinet later that night, I saw it. A faint smear of dried blood on the corner of one of my bank statement envelopes. It felt like the floor dropped beneath me. He had been in my home. He had touched my things, and he wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. After finding the smear of blood on my bank statement, I couldn't shake the truth anymore. Mr. Harlan had been inside my house. My stomach churned every time I thought about how many times he might have stood in this very room while Ava and I were asleep. The next morning, I bought new locks and a cheap security camera system from the hardware store. I spent the entire Saturday drilling holes, wiring sensors, and setting up alerts on my phone. Ava thought it was fun, like we were spying on bad guys. But to me, it wasn't a game. It was survival. That night, after Ava went to bed, I sat on the couch with my laptop, the security app open in one tab. Around midnight, the system pinged. My phone buzzed. Motion detected. I clicked instantly. The black and white footage showed Mr. Harlan standing on my front porch. He didn't knock. He didn't move. He just stood there, his head tilted slightly, as though he was listening for something inside. After 30 seconds, he walked out of frame. My hands were shaking as I pressed save. 2 hours later, another alert. This time, the backyard camera lit up. Mr. Harlan, walking slowly along the back of the house, stopping at the door, then just standing. He held something small in his hand, a key. My stomach dropped. The next morning, I called the police. I showed the officer the footage, my missing passport, the shuffled papers. He scribbled notes but seemed unconvinced. "He hasn't actually entered your house on camera," the officer said. "Standing on someone's porch isn't against the law. My advice? Change your locks, document everything, and if things escalate, file for a restraining order." That was it. That was their help. I called a locksmith that afternoon and had every lock changed. Deadbolts, too. No more spare key under the turtle. Still, I didn't feel safe. On Tuesday, I reviewed the latest footage while Ava was coloring at the kitchen table. At 3 a.m., Mr. Harlan had returned. He stood at my front door again. This time he bent down, fiddled with the knob, then straightened and walked away. He knew the locks had changed. That evening he knocked. I peeked through the peephole. He stood there holding a pie dish, covered in foil. His lips twitched in that half-smile, and he waited. Knocked again. 3 raps. Pause. 2 more. I didn't answer. For the next hour he came back 3 more times. Each time he stood longer, the smile slipping from his face, his eyes fixed on the door like he could see me hiding behind it. Finally, he set the pie dish on the porch and walked away. But he didn't go inside. I watched through the blinds as he sat on his front steps, facing my house, sipping from a thermos. He sat there for hours, unmoving, just watching. Every so often his head tilted up toward Ava's bedroom window. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, the pie dish was still there. I didn't touch it. By the 3rd day, I threw it away unopened, terrified of what he might have put inside. Weeks passed in a blur of anxiety. I documented everything. Screenshots, notes, photos. My folder grew thicker by the day. Ava didn't understand why she couldn't play outside anymore, why I kept the curtains drawn even in daylight, why every lock clicked shut the moment we stepped inside. Then, one evening, Mrs. Langley from across the street knocked on my door. Her voice trembled as she asked, "Have you seen the police at Harlan's place?" My pulse quickened. "Number Y?" She leaned closer, lowering her voice. "The landlord went inside today for an inspection. Said he found strange things. Boxes of other people's mail, photocopied IDs, notes about neighbors' comings and goings, pages of schedules." Her eyes filled with dread. "He had your name written down too." The world tilted. Later that week a detective called me. His voice was calm, clinical, but the words sent a chill down my spine. Mr. Harlan wasn't his real name. His actual name was Daniel Cole, and he had been arrested for identity theft and stalking in 2 other states. The landlord had found my passport in his kitchen drawer, along with spare keys and credit cards I hadn't even realized were missing. But Daniel was gone, vanished before police could question him. I hung up the phone, my hands trembling so badly I nearly dropped it. That night, I stood in Ava's doorway, watching her sleep. Her small chest rose and fell, her face serene and oblivious. My heart ached with relief and terror at once. Relief that she was safe, terror that I couldn't guarantee it forever. We moved out 2 weeks later. New town, new school, new locks. But I never stopped feeling watched. Even now, years later, I catch myself double-checking the blinds, checking the locks 3 times before bed, checking the shadows beneath the door. I still scan security footage at dawn like a ritual, because the scariest part isn't what Daniel stole, or even what he left behind. It's not knowing how many nights he stood in my living room, silent, watching me sleep, or how long he stood at Ava's door before turning away. The not knowing is the worst part of all. When I first moved into the neighborhood, I thought I had found heaven on earth. The street was calm, lined with neat houses that looked like they had been copied and pasted from a real estate brochure. Every lawn was trimmed with the same precision. Every porch light gave off the same warm glow. After years of city noise, the constant horns, shouting, and traffic, the stillness here felt like a gift. At first, I mistook the silence for peace. The first week passed without incident. I unpacked, painted a few rooms, and introduced myself to the neighbors. They were polite, almost overly so. Smiles that lingered too long, handshakes that squeezed a bit tighter than necessary, voices that carried a strange rehearsed quality, like they'd practiced every word. I brushed it off. People in small communities had their quirks. It wasn't until my second week that I noticed the eyes. I was coming home from the grocery store, fumbling with a bag of oranges, when I caught something glinting in the corner of my vision. A little red dot blinked faintly from the side of my mailbox. Curious, I leaned closer. At first I thought it was a reflection, but no, it was a pinhole camera lens. Someone had embedded it into the wood so cleanly you wouldn't notice unless the light hit it just right. I froze, staring at it. My mailbox, recording me. I remember glancing around, half expecting to see someone holding a remote or lurking behind a car. But the street was as empty as always. Too empty. That night, I convinced myself it was some old neighborhood security measure, maybe installed by the previous owner. Still, I didn't like the thought of it, so I taped over the lens and made a mental note to remove it when I had the tools. But the next morning, the tape was gone. Not peeled back, not dangling, gone. The lens exposed again, clear as ever. I didn't sleep well after that. Every creak of the house set my nerves on edge. I started noticing more of them, too. Tiny cameras tucked into garden lights, the frames of street signs, even the decorative birdhouse in my neighbor's yard. Once you knew what to look for, they were everywhere. I asked around, casually at first, but the neighbors just smiled too wide and said, "Oh, we like to keep things safe here." The phrase was identical, down to the pause before the word safe. That rehearsed tone again. By the third week, My unease had shifted into something darker. It was late, nearly midnight, when I found the envelope, just sitting there on my porch, perfectly centered like it had been measured. No name, no return address, just a plain white envelope. I don't know why I opened it right then, barefoot on the porch with the cicadas buzzing in the distance, but I did. Inside were photographs, dozens of them. Every single one was of me. Me carrying groceries, me tying my shoes before work, me taking the trash out, me sleeping. My breath hitched when I saw the last one. Me in bed, turned onto my side, mouth slightly open. The angle was wrong. It wasn't from the window or a crack in the curtains. It was from inside the room, inside my house. I dropped the envelope like it had burned me and stumbled back inside, locking the door, checking every window, every closet. My heart thudded so loud it drowned out every other sound. The photos shouldn't exist. No one had been in my house. I would have noticed, wouldn't I? That night I slept with the lights on, clutching a kitchen knife. My dreams twisted into blurred images of cameras blinking from every wall, every shadow. When I woke, the envelope was gone from the porch. I told myself I'd leave, pack up, break the lease, drive until the gas ran out. But when I tried the next morning, my car wouldn't start. Battery dead. A coincidence maybe. But then I saw the neat little scratch marks around the hood latch, like someone had been tampering with it. And then the second envelope appeared. This time, I didn't open it. I just shoved it in a drawer and sat on the couch, shaking. But curiosity gnawed at me, louder than fear. Finally, I tore it open. More photos. But these weren't from outside. They weren't even of me doing daily routines. They were of me sitting on the couch, staring at the first envelope. Of me opening it. Of me finding the photos. Whoever was watching wasn't documenting the past anymore. They were documenting the present. And I realized, with a creeping terror I couldn't put into words, there was no delay. They were watching me now. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard that soft sound, like a fingernail dragging against the inside of the walls. By morning, my body ached from lying stiff in bed, but my mind was sharper than ever, caught between fear and a need to know the truth. I told myself it was nothing. Rats, old pipes, the kind of noises old houses made. But the more I thought about it, the less sense it made. The scratching was too deliberate, too steady. By midday, I couldn't resist anymore. I pulled the bed away from the wall and knelt down, pressing my ear against the plaster. For a few minutes, silence. Then, faint but unmistakable, tap, drag, tap, drag. My breath caught in my throat. Someone, or something, was inside. I stumbled back, heart racing, but anger was starting to rise now, cutting through the fear. If there was some lunatic squatting inside my walls, I needed to know. I grabbed a hammer from the box of tools left behind in the basement and returned to the bedroom. My hands trembled as I raised it, hesitating, before finally slamming it into the wall. The plaster cracked, a small hole forming. Dust choked the air. I leaned closer to peer inside. Darkness. I widened the hole, ripping chunks of plaster away until I could fit my hand through. My fingers brushed against something soft and brittle, like fabric left too long in a damp cellar. I pulled it free. It was a piece of cloth, old, yellowed, and stitched into it was a name, written in faded ink. Clara. I froze. Clara had been the name written on one of the boxes in the basement, the ones I hadn't touched since moving in. Suddenly something moved deep inside the wall, brushing against my hand. I jerked back with a shout, dropping the cloth. The hole seemed to breathe for a moment, exhaling dust. That was it. I couldn't take any more. I grabbed my coat and bolted from the house. I spent the afternoon in town, lingering at the library, wandering the streets, doing anything to avoid going back. My hands still felt dirty from whatever I'd touched, but dread clung to me all the same. As the sun set, guilt began to gnaw at me. I couldn't keep running from my own home, and yet When I finally forced myself to return, the air inside the house felt heavier. I almost went straight upstairs, but something tugged at me, the memory of that name, Clara. Instead, I went down into the basement. The air was colder there, stale with mildew. I found the boxes stacked in the corner and crouched down, dragging one closer. It was filled with children's belongings, a pair of tiny shoes, a cracked porcelain doll with half its face missing, old letters, folded so many times they nearly crumbled in my hands. One letter was different, written in frantic handwriting. "She won't stop scratching. We thought she was playing at first, but it's been days now. She's in the walls. She won't eat, she won't sleep, just scratching, scratching, scratching. What do we do?" The paper slipped from my fingers. My chest tightened. I didn't even realize I was backing away until I hit the far wall of the basement. That's when the sound started again. Not upstairs this time. Not in the bedroom walls. In the basement. I turned toward the noise. It was coming from the far corner, behind the shelves. Tap, drag, tap, drag. Something moved in the shadows there, shifting just out of sight. My voice cracked when I whispered, "Who's there?" For a moment, silence. Then a reply. A child's voice. "Let me out." I don't remember climbing the stairs, only that suddenly I was slamming the basement door shut, locking it, and pressing my weight against it, as if something might burst through. The house was silent again, but silence was worse, because now I knew it wasn't just noises. There was something living in these walls, something that remembered, something that wanted out, and it knew my name. When we first moved into the apartment complex on Ridgeview Avenue, I thought we'd lucked out. The place was cheap for the area, the walls were freshly painted, and it had this huge bay window that let in afternoon sunlight. My girlfriend, Clara, had already started decorating, draping string lights across the curtain rod and setting up plants along the sill. It was our first place together, and the excitement almost drowned out the exhaustion of hauling boxes up 3 flights of narrow stairs. Almost. I met Marjorie that afternoon, the woman who lived directly across the hall. She appeared out of nowhere just as I was carrying the last box inside. A small figure with sharp cheekbones, faded blonde hair, and an old wool sweater hanging from her shoulders, even though it was August. She smiled with too many teeth and said, "Welcome to the building," like she'd been waiting for us. She held out a plate of brownies. Store-bought, clearly, the kind wrapped in plastic that you could pick up from any gas station. But she'd arranged them on a porcelain plate with little blue flowers painted around the rim, like that made them special. Clara, being nicer than me, thanked her and took one. I pretended to be grateful, but the whole interaction left me uneasy. Something about her eyes, the way they lingered, too focused, as if she were memorizing us. By the end of the first week, Marjorie had knocked on our door 4 separate times. The first was to borrow a screwdriver. Then she needed help lifting a box. Another time her remote wasn't working and she didn't know how to fix the channels. I tried not to mind. She was older and it felt cruel to turn her away. Clara warned me not to get too involved. "Some people see kindness as an invitation," she said, but I shrugged it off. A month later, the knocks hadn't stopped. If anything, they'd grown more persistent. She needed rides. She needed groceries. She needed a little cash to tide her over until her pension came in. Always small amounts, never much. $5 here, 20 there. I told myself it was temporary, that she was just struggling. But soon it wasn't just the money. It was her presence. She learned our schedules fast. She knew when I left for work, when Clara went to the gym, when we took laundry downstairs. If I so much as rattled the doorknob, she was there, cardigan pulled tight around her shoulders, voice sweet but insistent. "Oh, perfect timing, dear. Could you help me just a moment?" Clara started sneaking down the back stairwell to avoid her. I wasn't that lucky. I couldn't shake the guilt when Marjorie looked up at me with watery eyes and whispered how lonely she was, how her daughter never visited, how her health was failing. Every excuse tugged at something inside me. The strange part was, despite all her supposed struggles, her apartment never reflected it. I'd been inside once, when she asked me to help move a chair. The place was cluttered but spotless, every shelf lined with porcelain dolls and angels, their glassy eyes following me around the room. She had photographs on the wall, a younger Marjorie smiling with a man, children at different ages, but the pictures stopped abruptly after what looked like the late 90s. No grandchildren, no updates, just a freeze frame of a family that no longer existed. The smell of artificial air freshener clung to everything, sharp and chemical, as though she were masking something underneath. By the second month, other tenants began to warn me. In the laundry room, a man named Howard, who worked nights at the factory, leaned close and said, "She got you, huh?" When I asked what he meant, he told me Marjorie had done the same to the last couple in our unit, and the couple before them. Both had left early, drained of patience and money. "She knows exactly what she's doing," he said bitterly, tossing his work clothes into the dryer. "She bleeds the young ones, the ones who don't know better yet." I laughed it off at the time, but I couldn't ignore the gnawing suspicion that he was right. Clara pressed harder for us to shut Marjorie out. "She's manipulating you," she said one night as we ate takeout on the couch. "I'm telling you, she's not what she seems." I wanted to argue, but then came the night when Marjorie pounded on our door at nearly midnight. Her voice was trembling, panicked. She said her cat was sick, that it couldn't breathe, that she didn't have enough for the emergency vet. Clara hissed at me not to open the door, but I did. I handed her $40 I couldn't spare. The next afternoon, I saw the cat lounging happily in the window, licking its paw in the sunlight. When I mentioned it, Marjorie just smiled. "The medicine worked quickly," she said, though her eyes flickered away from mine. That was when something inside me began to crack. The requests escalated after that. Her nephew needed surgery. Her landlord threatened eviction. A debt collector was harassing her. Each story more dramatic than the last. Each one accompanied by pleading eyes and trembling hands. I'd already given her more than I could admit to Clara. Every time I promised myself it was the last time. Every time I failed. Then one evening, as I sat at the kitchen table trying to sort bills, I heard her voice through the wall. She was laughing, not the weak, desperate sound she usually used with us, but a full, rich laugh that didn't belong to the fragile woman she pretended to be. "No, no," she said, her voice carrying through the plaster. "The new couple's perfect. They hate saying no. I've got everything written down so I don't repeat myself. The trick is timing, you see. Catch them when they can't walk away." I froze. My stomach dropped. She had a system, and we were part of it. I didn't tell Clara right away about what I'd overheard. I sat there at the table for hours, staring at the bills, my mind replaying Marjorie's laughter. She wasn't a struggling old woman. Not really. She was a predator. And she had been recording us in her head like numbers on a ledger, calculating every weakness. When I finally told Clara the next morning, she didn't look surprised. "I told you," she said flatly. "I knew from the beginning." She wanted to cut Marjorie off completely. No more rides, no more money, no more pretending. I agreed in theory, but the reality was harder. The next time Marjorie knocked, mid-afternoon, clutching a manila envelope and wringing her hands, I stayed silent. She knocked again, harder. Then her voice cut sharp through the wood. "I know you're in there. I saw you come home. Just one favor. Just a ride to the bank. You can't ignore me forever." My chest tightened as I pressed my back against the wall, holding my breath. Clara stood beside me, eyes blazing. Eventually Marjorie left, but when we came home later that night, she was sitting on the stairs in the dark. She didn't say anything, just watched us with those watery eyes as we walked past, her expression blank, but her presence heavy, oppressive. That night, Clara made me promise. No more. But promises mean little when you've already been trained to respond. The next week, she slipped a note under our door. Scrawled in shaky handwriting, the paper trembled as if written in a rush. I thought you were good people. I thought you cared. Now I'll be on the street because of you. I know where you work. I know your car. I know your family. Don't think you can ignore me." I sat on the couch holding that note until my hands shook. Clara grabbed it, read it, and without a word, ripped it into pieces. "We're done with her," she said. "Completely." But that night, I couldn't sleep. Every sound in the hallway, footsteps, the elevator creaking, a door shutting, felt like her watching, waiting. And then came the sirens. It was a Thursday in late October, close to midnight. Clara and I had been watching TV when flashing lights painted the walls red and blue. At first I thought it was another accident on Ridgeview, but then the noise grew louder, closer, until it was right outside our building. We peeked through the window and saw 3 police cars and an ambulance. Neighbors flooded into the hallway, whispering, half-dressed, faces pale under the fluorescent lights. Then the pounding on Marjorie's door began. "Police! Open up!" When she finally did, she was calm, serene even, wearing that same cardigan, her face expressionless. She didn't argue when they told her she needed to come with them. She just nodded, like she'd been expecting this moment all along. As they led her past us, her eyes lingered on each neighbor in turn. When her gaze fell on me, I froze. She didn't look angry. She didn't even look disappointed. She looked like she was cataloging me one final time, filing me away in whatever ledger she kept in her head. The hallway buzzed with whispers after she was gone. Someone said her brother had been found dead across state lines. Someone else murmured, "Poison." Another mentioned life insurance, power of attorney, money. Nobody knew the truth, but the way the officers had escorted her out left little doubt. This went far beyond borrowed rent money and fake emergencies. The next day, detectives came to our door. They asked questions about Marjorie's behavior, her stories, her requests for money. I answered as honestly as I could, though shame burned in my throat. I admitted how much I'd given her. Clara glared at me but stayed silent. When the detective left, he didn't give us answers, just a warning look, the kind that said, "You were lucky." A week later, her apartment was cleaned out. Not by movers, but by men in hazmat suits. The smell that leaked into the hallway when they opened the door was sour, chemical, unbearable. I covered my mouth and nose, but even then it felt like it clung to my tongue. They carried out boxes, bags, and finally a stack of old notebooks. I saw one open in a worker's hand, pages filled with small, neat handwriting. I caught glimpses of names, Howard in 3B, the Guans in 2C, and then my own, circled in red ink. Next to it, weak with guilt, gives in under pressure, easy to sway when alone. I stumbled back, bile rising in my throat. Clara put her arm around me, but I could feel her trembling too. Management later told us Marjorie had plenty of money, more than enough. She'd never been late on rent, never close to eviction. The stories, the tears, the emergencies, all fabricated. It wasn't about survival. It was about control. It was about seeing how far she could push. We moved out as soon as our lease ended, found a smaller place across town, where no one waited outside our door, where the sound of a knock didn't send me into a panic. But even now, months later, I still wake at night thinking I hear it. Soft at first, then louder, insistent, demanding. Sometimes I dream of her voice through the wall, sharp with laughter, bragging about her system. Other times I dream of those notebooks, pages and pages of names, and wonder how many people she had written down, how many stories she'd invented, how many lives she'd twisted for sport. And sometimes, on the worst nights, I dream of that last look she gave me as the police took her away, cold, detached, but certain, like she knew she hadn't finished with me yet.